Senate Commerce is in session. Senator Lang, you're going to tell us all about 515 relative to consumer guarantee contracts.
Well, I hate to start off right away disagreeing with the chair, but I promise you I'll introduce the bill.
Thank you.
So I'm Senator Tim Lang from District 2, representing the Lakes region. What you have before you is Senate Bill 515, which was introduced at the request of the Commissioner of the Insurance Department. It makes some modifications and updates to customer contracts. I will say that I had a conversation yesterday with the Deputy Commissioner. There's been some agreed upon language changes made between some of the parties, so everybody came to an agreement with the language in the bill. I've submitted that to OLS already for the changes. However, it hasn't come back yet, and they're having staffing problems right now, so it may not be till tomorrow we get it. But there are a lot more smarter people than me, which is basically most of the state, behind me, that will happily answer questions about exactly what this bill does and its implications. I will say that I'm pretty sure that the rain outside and the hell freezing over is because it's the first time I'm in front of your committee, and last week was the first time you were in front of my committee in my 7 years in the legislature.
Thank you, Senator. There are a lot smarter people, it's not more smarter. Thank you, though. John Hilliard. It's Joshua, I know. Good morning, how you doing? Well, dicey drive, but I'm here.
Thank you for having me. The commissioner wanted to be here today, but I don't believe the information is the letter. But we're here, myself, Dr. Lear, and the enforcement counsel of the Hampshire Insurance Department. The bill was changed the law, director of the stop the activity. We're right a little bit back on this. So you go back, the enforcement counsel means help regulate any of the carriers or producers. Thank you. As well as, of course, any of the consumer guarantee contract obligors. And we've run into an issue these past few years. And I don't want to paint with too wide a brush. There's good actors in this field, but unfortunately, there's quite a few bad actors. And what we've seen in the state is just a huge influx of particularly mailers that come in that are entirely unbranded with sort of high pressure sales tactics that just flood the state. And we receive a lot of consumer complaints at the department about this because they are regulated by the insurance department. And one of the issues we've realized is it can be almost impossible to track down who these entities are that are not complying with New Hampshire law. For example, myself and my team have made many calls on, you'll get this mailer where the only identifying information will be a toll-free number. There won't be any company name. There's no person identified in the mailer. There is no address, no email address. So we just call these numbers to find out who's sending these mailers into the state. And unfortunately, what we get back is a lot of pushback. Myself and my team members have been cursed at. They threaten to report us to the bar as if what we're doing is somehow in violation of that. It just becomes a real big headache to try to track down these entities and properly regulate them in the state. So what we're looking for with this bill is to tighten that up, to make it so that, obligors and their sellers must identify themselves. That's one of the primary focus of this bill. So they need to identify themselves in any of those mailers that they send. I know that James Fox, again, the director of P&C, is here as well to provide some testimony from his point of view.
Hi, my name is James Fox. I'm the P&C director. And I want to just clarify, Commissioner Betancourt is trying to get here. There was some trouble on the road. Josh explained the problem, and I would like to emphasize there are a lot of good players in the market. We've worked with AARP in particular because this is a lot of issues that's focused on seniors. And we have, the good players, kind of the gray area players, and then the scam players, and that's really what Josh is getting to in some of this about the scam players. And to kind of just give a little more flavor on how bad this can be, we've had consumers who have inadvertently or unknowingly given out their checking account information to these sellers, and then that checking account information gets circulated, and then money is just coming out of their account. They have to close their account. They have to try to find a way to ask the bank to get money back, and then the phone calls really increase, and then they have to change their phone number. So it is a huge issue in the state, but the fix we think is fairly actually simple. What we've done is, consumer guarantee contracts, to be clear, those things, if you buy a car, they ask you if you'd like an extended warranty. which comes after your initial warranty. Or if you go to Amazon and buy a product, they'll ask you if you like an extended warranty for that product. And those are usually, the good players. But to keep track of everybody, it's very hard because our statute currently that we do regulate this area doesn't really give us a way to keep track. So what we did is we took the insurance model, which is what we usually do, and we have the obligors like the insurer. So now they register, they've always registered, but now the obligor has to tell us who their sellers are, which is the same as the insurance companies. They have to appoint producers and they tell us who their producers are. So then we know the rules of the road, who's working for whom. So when we have a problem, we can trace back to the obligor, which is has been a problem. The other thing we'd like to do is have them file their contracts. They don't currently file their contracts with us. We're not going to approve their contracts. We're going to do it like we do in a commercial setting. We're going to receive them and then audit them as necessary. And if anybody uses an unfiled contract, then that would be a violation of the statute. And then the last thing we're going to do, which is I think probably the most important, is to increase the prohibited acts, which is very similar to insurance. We have unfair claims practices. So as Mr. Hilliard said, there'll be unbranded solicitations will be not allowed. So it'll be very easy for us to tell, say, in a PSA that if you've received an unbranded solicitation that is illegal, do not respond. Where now we have to say, well, they're not illegal, but it's not a good idea to respond. So that would be new. And then we have any act that we view as exploiting seniors, which is our main concern, would also be illegal. So if we have an issue, we think a seller in particular is exploiting seniors, then we would be able to say that this is specifically prohibited in New Hampshire. And then there are other several things like from the unfair claims practices, which are more standard, like promptly replying, equitable settlements, reasonable investigations that are in the statute now. So that's basically it. It's an identification ability, a form review ability, and then we'll be able to more easily tell the consumers, and particularly seniors, through senior centers, et cetera, who the good players are and who the bad players are. We think it's good for all citizens of New Hampshire. And now I will turn it over to the commissioner who's here.
Good morning, Senators. The whole presentation is a little bit backwards this morning. I apologize for being late. The roads were a bit tricky this morning. In any event, for those of you who don't know me, my name is DJ Betancourt. I have the pleasure of serving as the Commissioner of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. And we did, in fact, request, and we are here, as you have seen this morning, to advocate for Senate Bill 515. As many of you know who have worked with me in the past, my philosophy in my regulatory approach is that intervention in the free market should only occur when well-defined, solid objectives can be obtained by such an intervention, or when inherent monopoly structures prevent a free market competitive system from operating. Simply put, my belief is that government should foster rather than frustrate competition. It should seek to ensure maximum freedom for free enterprise. So why are we here this morning requesting additional regulatory tools around consumer guarantee contracts, otherwise known as 415C products? Because as you have heard, over the past several years, we have seen egregious abuses of consumers from some of the companies that not only harm consumers, but are hindering the broader industry through reputational harm. My team, I think, has outlined some of the abuses that we have seen and how this legislation addresses them. But I would say as well that there is a compelling need here, not only because consumers are being harmed, but because a particularly vulnerable group of consumers is being harmed, and that are senior citizens who are far more vulnerable to get caught up in one of these schemes by one of these bad actors. We see them come through our legal review meetings all the time. It is incredibly frustrating, and we are obviously seeking to have greater tools to be able to address some of those bad behaviors. I would say, and I do want to stress, that there are a number of good companies who are offering important products to consumers in this space. And they understand, as we do, the reason that we need to bring reform in terms of how we oversee these products. And I've been greatly pleased by the broad array of industry stakeholders who have helped us to craft this legislation. They appreciate more than anyone that if bad actors are allowed to continue to engage in the tactics that we have seen, that it undermines that market and it undermines public confidence in their ethics and hard work, of which they've labored over many, many years. And so therefore, they worked with us to address the deceptive marketing tactics, the inappropriate claims handling processes, and the misrepresentation in coverages. As James or Josh may have mentioned, there is an amendment before you. When we came up against the deadline, we provided Senator Lang with the best amendment of the best language we had at that time, but we kept working with industry to make sure that we were getting it right, that we were addressing the harms that we wanted to address without hindering that market. Yesterday, we had a very positive conversation with the New Hampshire Auto Dealers Association. They had a couple of suggestions too. Those were not problematic. We incorporated them in. I hope that's the amendment that's before you. It's in the process. That's no worries. So I think we've got broad consensus here. I think we've got broad agreement, which is obviously something our department works really, really hard to try to get to. So in any event, I'm sure that James and Josh did a great job, but we're happy to answer any questions you have.
They did do a great job. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, it was very straightforward, so thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you all.
Thank you. Jim Hayden. Morning, guys. How you doing? How are your drives? Good? Stacy? No events is good. Sure.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. There we go. All right, I'll take it from the top. Good morning again, Jim Hayden. Here with respect to representing the Service Contract Industry Council. With me here is Travis Moore, General Counsel to the SCIC. And I just wanted to introduce the association, which is really a trade association of all of the companies that provide service contracts, and we call these service contracts in our industry because they're a sort of a little pocket of a product that, frankly, is a little bit like insurance, but it's actually not technically offered as an insurance product, nor is insurance companies the ones who primarily write it. So here we're talking about, in the words of the legislation and the statute, they're called obligors, but these are service contract providers. I would say we've been working with the department on this legislation for quite some time, and we've heard that there's a proposed amendment coming in. We look forward to looking at that amendment and expressing our opinion to this committee as to what it looks like. But for now, I'd just like to reserve comments on the amendment and turn this over to Travis Moore.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As Jim mentioned, I'm the General Counsel for the Service Contract Industry Council, and I wanted to come here today to support this legislation for many of the reasons that were expressed by Commissioner Bettencourt and his team. I can't thank them enough for being willing to work so closely with us and making sure that this language was drafted in a way that isn't overly cumbersome to all of the law-abiding and well-managed companies out there who are our members, offering very valuable products to consumers throughout New Hampshire that help them protect their finances as it relates to their home, motor vehicle, as well as consumer goods, things like cell phones and protection plans on consumer electronics. So these are really valuable products that a lot of consumers really appreciate, and they bring a lot of value to them. However, as the department expressed, there have perhaps been some bad actors or those who would abuse the value that these products bring by engaging in unscrupulous sales and marketing practices. And we recognize that the department seeks to curb that, and we support that. Getting rid of the bad actors and eliminating bad practices only seeks to improve the reputation of the industry and better serve our members. And I want to be clear, The SCIC opposes any sales methods that are abusive to elders, are excessively aggressive, or otherwise unfair and deceptive. We appreciate the department's desire to curb this conduct and their efforts to eliminate bad actors, and we believe that this bill will help them do that. And to that end, we very much support this legislation. We look forward to reviewing some of the additional amendments, of course. But again, the department has been very good in working with us and engaging with the industry to ensure that this bill is not unduly burdensome and accomplishes the ends that they are aiming it for. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Sure, just general question. So you're selling me my washer and dryer and you're pushing, I remember Leechmere, I had a brother when he was young, worked there, and he got paid like a percentage, like half of the commission on the sales amount. It was a huge amount. So I could see where that could be very abusive. I would do anything then if I'm gonna make an extra $100 if I sell you that policy. The terminology is all good, but it's sort of a vague term. All your terms that we're using, unfair, unscrupulous. Is it gonna be too vague to actually do anything? These nice grandiose terms are good. How
Yeah.
are they gonna funnel down to know that the guy is not being abusive and pushing that contract on the old couple?
So a couple of comments on that. One, I think if you look at all the language that was brought in on this bill and the unfair and deceptive practices, that one, it's very akin to what you see in insurance. So they do have a history of enforcing this type of language. The other thing that I would note, and I think that this was brought up in the department's testimony, is that one of the challenges that they have faced is unbranded marketing coming into the market. So it's not about whether or not the language is insufficient to protect consumers based upon its ambiguity. It's that they can't even get to the necessary party in order to enforce the existing statute. And so the way I see this legislation is more about giving them the tools they need to get at bad actors as opposed to necessarily just expanding the language around what's being enforced. I totally understand unfair and deceptive is always going to be open to interpretation. But I think this bill does a little bit more than that in its ability to enable the department to reach the companies and the bad actors who are frankly taking advantage of both consumers and the industry by giving it a bad name that it frankly does not deserve.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Can you walk me through a little bit, give me some example perhaps, or just help me to understand better what the different methods a bad actor might use versus a good actor? I understand once they've connected with someone, the things they may do wrong, but are there differences in the way they connect?
Yeah, I mean, I know the department can probably answer this better than me because they've collected some of the mailers and solicitations that they have taken issue with. I also know some stories of older people who may have been sold multiple policies on the same home. So you have duplicative coverage. That's obviously inappropriate. And companies should know better than to do something like that. There are pressure tactics in which someone's made to believe that if they don't do this, there will be some huge liability or risk that's imposed upon them. So various ways of getting at that, whether it be a mailer or other form of direct marketing where an individual of a particular community is sought out and then put in a position where they feel as though they have no choice.
Seeing no other questions, thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Does anyone else wish to testify on 5:15? Seeing none, this hearing is adjourned. Okay. Sounds good. You are on the hot seat, Dan. We will start at 3:34. Honorable Senator Innes, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Dan Innes from Bradford, New Hampshire, representing District 7. And I'm before you this morning to introduce Senate Bill 334. I will be exceptionally brief. Presently, student loan programs are bonded through the New Hampshire Higher Education Assistance Foundation and the New Hampshire Health and Education Facilities Authority. This bill simply adds the Business Finance Authority to that mix. The BFA would be empowered to issue bonds for student loans. There are some folks here from the BFA, as well as the university system, though I don't think the system is testifying, but I'm sure they would be able to answer your questions much better than I. If you do have any basic questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Senator.
All right.
Seeing none, you are off the odds.
All right, thank you.
James Key Wallace? Wall. How's the end go? Wall Q. Okay, no, my guess was Wallace, but I didn't want to say it wrong. Good morning, sir.
Thank you. James Key Wallace, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Business Finance Authority. Thank you for filing the bill, Senator Innes, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having me here today. So I'm here to testify in support of the bill. Senator Innes, I think, described it quite succinctly and aptly. It simply adds the BFA to the list of allowed issuers for bonds that are used by the New Hampshire Higher Education Assistance Foundation to in turn make affordable student loans, particularly impacting those folks in New Hampshire who need it the most. The BFA issues bonds as a regular course of business for-profit and nonprofit entities. Right now, we are not statutorily authorized to issue these kind of bonds. This would just put us on the list that we can do it. I think in some ways, what might be most notable about this bill is actually on the last page, on page 4. You see the additional language in this particular case, starting on line 5, that says, upon issuance of the bonds, as long as the board of the BFA agrees, we can waive the fee. So one thing the BFA has started doing recently is offering bonds with no issuance fee to our nonprofit borrowers. And the reason that's important is if there are fewer fees to issue the bonds, in this case, the students of New Hampshire who are borrowing student loans are going to pay a lower interest rate. So it does that at no cost to the state. It's 100% benefit to the students, and it's win-win. We use no state funds. This is not state liability. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. And seeing no questions, thanks very much.
Thank you.
I have no one else wanting to testify in 334. Unless, come on down.
I may have forgot to check the box.
Yeah, that's okay. You're Christina?
Yes.
Awesome.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Christiana Thornton. I'm president of Granite Advance, formerly known as the New Hampshire Higher Education Assistance Foundation, or NEAF. And I'm here today in support of this legislation. Under the current statute, we have had the opportunity to work with HEPA. And the current statute provides, it limits BFA's authority to be able to issue student loan bonds. And so this simply would enable us to actually have more flexibility to work with multiple issuers. We actually recently did a transaction with HEFA. And I think what's important to note is that HEFA and BFA have actually already been working really closely together. In fact, with our transaction, we were pleased to be able to work with HEFA, but the bond capacity that HEFA had at that time was limited. And so we were fortunate that BFA was willing to transfer that authority over to HEFA to enable us to move forward with the transaction. So from our perspective, this just enables continued collaboration between each of the entities, provides a little bit more flexibility. These are, fairly significant transactions. And sometimes depending on that rate environment, you need to be able to have as much flexibility as possible to be able to go to market with and get the most affordable loan possible for students. what this all means, so that you guys kind of have a sense, like, you have all this authority and statutes. What does it mean for New Hampshire students? So in this case, we recently did a transaction. It was a $30 million bond issuance, again, through HEFA, with that authority transferred from BFA. We anticipate with those resources, we'll be able to provide about approximately 2,000 New Hampshire students with low-cost loans. Based on the issuance costs and these rates, we anticipate and expect that New Hampshire residents will save about 165 basis points, which really is really significant in comparison to transactions where we have to go to the taxable market. That ends up being approximately $3,000 in savings for a New Hampshire student and their family. I think it's important to sort of keep that in mind as to like, why does all this matter? Ultimately, we know that the cost of higher education is incredibly expensive. The cost of student loans is increasing. This is one way in New Hampshire that we're able to try and reduce that burden. You may need to take out a student loan. The extent to which the state can help us to be able to reduce that cost as much as possible is to the benefit of New Hampshire residents. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Seeing none, I personally thank you, so I do have an interest off the fund. But yeah, as a parent of many kids going to college, taking these loans, thank you.
Perfect. All right,
And
no
no
questions.
other questions.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day. Does anyone else wish to testify on 334? Seeing none, the hearing's adjourned. I gotta read the testimony. It looks a bit. There you go. In a few minutes, yeah. Yes, I'll hand you the big gavel. It's a heavy burden. I think it's my one that said, yeah, 517. Well, she wrote a long thing. Do they have my testimony?
I did not receive that.
Oh, okay.
All right. I'll open the hearing on Senate Bill 517, and I will welcome Senator Gannon.
Thank you, Senator Ennis. I bring before you 517, and I'm not going to read, even though you don't have my testimony, it's way too long here. So we'll give you the basics, and then people who are much more knowledgeable will tell you. Without looking, nothing in my sleeves. So if you're an RA at a school, which I was for a little while, 40 years ago. I figured out it was a long time ago, Dan. So was I an employee or was I not? Is the question today. So institutions of higher education throughout the country, including New Hampshire, routinely include student residence hall advisors as part of their residential life programs. Student RAs serve a vital role as role models, leaders. I don't know if I did, but provide resources for other students and gain valuable experience in conflict and time management. RA positions are designed to be transactional jobs, not to be transactional jobs. They're designed to foster relationships with other students living together in the halls. The Department of Labor advises that university or college students who participate in activities generally recognized as extracurricular, including residence hall assistants and dorm counselors, are generally not considered to be employees for purpose of federal labor law. The USDOL has maintained that the position consistently over multiple decades throughout Democratic and Republican administrations. Colleges and universities across the country have successfully managed residential life and similar extracurricular programs while conforming to that advice. New Hampshire law is currently silent as to the employment status of RAs and other students participating in extracurricular programs. This recently led the New Hampshire Department of Labor to investigate whether the absence of clear and statutory language to the contrary, RAs should be classified as employees. New Hampshire colleges and universities believe that the classification would risk fundamentally changing residential life programs in the state. If RAs are employees, their hours worked must be scheduled and tracked to the minute. Sounds like they're lawyers, which is inconsistent with the notion that RAs are available to students as needed, potentially at odd hours. If RAs are employees, they may no longer be viewed as peers by their students, lessening their effectiveness. Additionally, for those students who rely on those stipends and programs to help pay for their higher education, losing out on financial package that is structured for resident assistance may impede some of these students' ability to seek college degrees. These problems can be avoided by simply conforming New Hampshire law to the long-standing federal guidance. SB 517 does this by amending the relevant definitions of the term employee in the Labor Code to clarify that the university or college students who participate in activities generally recognized as extracurricular, including residence hall assistants and dorm counselors, should not be characterized as employees. Members of the New Hampshire College and University Council have met for discussions with the Department of Labor about the issue and have worked with them to develop this language. And I think they follow up behind me. Thank you.
Any questions for the senator? All right, thank you
Thank
very much. New Hampshire Employment Security is here. Richard Labors, if you could join us, please.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Richard Labors, Deputy Commissioner with Employment Security. Our piece of this, I'll just be brief. Section 6 deals with 282A, which is the unemployment compensation statute. Currently, the unemployment compensation statute actually excludes these types of services from being considered in employment. So the effect of that is that the university or any other nonprofit college university does not have to report the wages paid to these type of students who are doing a work-study type of job. If they're a tax-paying employer, taxes would not be paid because those are excluded wages. They're not in employment. And then if an individual were to file for unemployment benefits, these types of wages would not be includable for purposes of calculating their benefit.
Right. So
that's current law. I'm not sure, I defer to hearing from the university and other folks, but the exclusion, the new language proposed in Section 6 of the bill, I think the current statute already accomplishes what that they're seeking to accomplish. I'm not speaking to the rest of the bill, but just with that part of Section 6.
All right.
And I'll stop right there.
Are there questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Shannon Reed from the Community College System of New Hampshire. Oh, you don't? Yeah, you didn't check the box. I need more of this. Thank you. All right. We have Reverend Dr. Gail Kinney, who would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Acting Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Gail Kinney. I am a resident of Canaan. I'm a church pastor and a state-level advocate for worker rights and workplace fairness within the United Church of Christ. You may know the UCC is the Congregational Churches, but the United Church of Christ is the largest Protestant denomination in New Hampshire. And so I'm here to share with you that sort of despite the explanation of the bill, that both my congregation and my statewide faith networks are appalled and were frankly mystified by Senate Bill 517. I also want to acknowledge the many undergraduate student workers in New Hampshire in various colleges and universities right now who are employed by the various institutions of higher education as residence hall advisors, and who likely have no idea that there's a bill in the legislature that you're hearing right now that takes aim directly and solely at them and at their worker rights. So my networks and I want to know, and I understand now that the sponsor has said that the language, I believe you said, comes from the College and University Council, but we were wondering why this specific carve out and of young workers, and who asked for this and why particularly, and what workplace dynamics were at play that sparked this bill, and why now in this particular instance. So I urge you actually to look very carefully at the language that appears repeatedly in 517 and that is paired with saying that that this language precludes one particular type of worker from being defined as employees. So the phrase is, so contending that folks aren't employees, university or college students who participate in activities generally recognized as extracurricular, including students serving as residence hall assistants or dormitory counselors. So if you look at this language very clearly, there are two illogical concepts that are fused together in this one phrase. So the two separate concepts are engaging in extracurricular activities and then doing a job as a residence hall assistant. So the word extracurricular is not defined in the bill, but the Oxford Dictionary says that extracurricular pertains to an activity at a school or college pursued in addition to the normal course of study. Extracurricular activities include drama, music, chess. That's the end of the quote for the definition. But I want to ask each one of you when you think of college or university extracurricular activities, what do you think about? Do you think about the chess club or a cappella chorus, or do you think about a job that somebody is doing on campus? And in particular, when somebody says the word extracurricular, do you think of a very specific job that a student is doing dealing with student mental and physical health issues and the overall well-being of other students? I would think not, that's not what comes to your mind when you hear extracurricular. And so in my perspective, it's really dangerous to conflate these two discordant and contradictory concepts. So I also wonder, I didn't hear in the testimony, so I don't know if it's in the written testimony, if the sponsors of this bill know that the National Labor Relations Board has already dealt with the question of employee status of residence hall advisors, or RAs. I'll use RA after this. Over 6 years ago, the NLRB determined that workers in this job category indeed are employees. And other jurisdictions have considered the same matter over the years. And just in Massachusetts, for example, the status of RAs as employees at the University of Massachusetts was settled over 20 years ago. So here are some legal measures that one must look at when determining if somebody has employee status. So our RAs, they make application for their positions and they're hired by the college and university to do a very specific job. The job application process includes screening for particular skills and abilities. The RA performs concrete services for which they receive compensation from the employer. The work of RAs involves specific responsibilities and job expectations. And RAs work under the control of the college or university. In other words, they're hired and fired, or could be fired. And they can be relieved of their job by the employer. The National Labor Relations, and this is their board, also found, and this is the specific language, there is no compelling policy consideration that requires excluding RAs from the definition of employee, nor is there a compelling reason to do so here in New Hampshire. So when somebody comes to you, even, somebody, a worthy employer in the state, an important employer in the state, and says, can you carve out some of our workers and declare that they're no longer employees? Why would you do that? And where is this leading to? Why stop now? So you're saying the bill says RAs in colleges and universities today. What other employer then does that invite to come to you and say, please classify my workers as not being employees so that then the employee rights don't kick in? So obviously there was something very specific in mind. I don't know exactly what it was and what triggered this bill, but there's some very certain interests that's at play. But legally, and then the findings of the National Labor Relations Board, this is both legally and morally wrong. And so in my mind, in the mind of people that I work with, it really cries out for inexpedient to legislate. I will say that some faculty folks that knew I was looking at this bill at one of our colleges contacted me just last night and said, where did this come from? Who's behind it? And why now? There's real concern on campuses about taking away a right from young student employees that have no idea that you're considering taking away their worker rights at this point. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to take the time to share with you.
Yeah, hearing no questions, thank you very much for your participation. Appreciate it greatly. All right, Chad Pimental from the University System of New Hampshire is here and would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify. My name is Chad Pimentel. I'm the General Counsel of the University System of New Hampshire. I have prepared remarks. I'll be honest with you. The chair's remarks covered them all, maybe even more efficiently than I would. So maybe we'd like to focus on responding to the very good questions and points that the previous speaker raised. Why now? Where did this language come from? And what's different about being an RA or CA than any other type of campus employment that you think about? The impetus for this is, I know it's phrased as this is taking away someone's rights, but the university system's campuses have operated for a number of years under the idea that RAs and CAs don't qualify as employees. And they've done so relying on guidance from the Federal Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. That guidance has been out for a number of years, and it specifically says that RAs and CAs are ordinarily not considered to be employees for purposes of federal wage and hour law. I suppose the question then is why? And I'd say I'd maybe highlight two specific points. There's more in the testimony, but one is the notion of what RAs and CAs do. We do view our residence life program as an extension of the university system's overall educational programs. Why do we have the students come to campus? I mean, and it's a genuine question in the age of distance learning. And the answer is there's value in that. You learn in the dorms, you learn across the campus. But in particular, we view that residence life as an important enhancement of our educational programs. And RAs and CAs are really the backbone of that in two ways. One is the RAs and CAs themselves learn. They acquire really important soft skills that Senator Gannon highlighted in terms of conflict management, time management, leadership. But they also form, again, the backbone of this larger residential life program that helps the students living on the hall learn and develop as future citizens. And so we don't view this as the same as working at the bookstore on an hourly wage, which of course is employment and they're entitled to all the protections, or any other type of work-study job that you might think of. We generally view this as more akin to part of the educational heartland of our program. And so we believe it's different for that regard. Second reason is if they are considered to be employees, there are some real challenging consequences for how we run the program. So let's just say hypothetically, yes, these folks are employees for purposes of wage and hour. That means we need to, as Senator said, track their time down to the minute. Someone comes and knocks on the RA's door at 1:30 in the morning and says, I need your help. And the RA says, hang on a second, I'm going to clock in. That's not the first response that we want. It's supposed to be less formal than that. Second is, we then have to, as we go and track our wage and hour compliance, it would be challenging because across the system, the single largest component of the compensation these folks get is free housing. And free housing doesn't break down into X number of dollars an hour. It's actually really difficult to demonstrate, and the Department of Labor has advised the university system that the value of that free housing can't be counted towards wage and hour requirements. It wouldn't count towards minimum wage or overtime if that's being earned. So that the single largest piece of their compensation doesn't count. So if they are employees, we'd have to rethink entirely how these folks get compensated, likely move away from free housing to things that do count, and going to treating them like any other hourly worker where you punch in and then you have a time card and all of that. Our students don't want that. Our students want the free housing, both because housing is hard to find around our campuses, and because just structurally the way that that students have to interact financially with the university. Right? They get a bill at the start of the semester for here's for classes, here's for housing. If they have to pay for that housing, that may be additional students who have to take out a loan. Now, yes, they may get more dollar compensation on the back end of that, but what we hear from our students is they by and large don't want that. What they would like is the free house. So categorizing them as employees counter to how the university system has operated for a number of years, and counter to how the Federal Department of Labor has advised that these folks be set up for wage and hour purposes for a number of years, would force us to rethink the program in ways that we think would not benefit either the students in the dorms or the RAs themselves. And as why now, which again is always a perfectly reasonable question to ask, the answer is, as we've been talking to the Department of Labor, they recently and correctly pointed out that New Hampshire state law is silent on this point now. And they, in the absence of clear statutory guidance on how to handle this, their inclination was to say, well, maybe they ought to be treated as employees, which again, given the current gap in the statute, is a perfectly reasonable place to land, but it does would cause all of these consequences to come down the pike that I'm not sure folks were prepared for, and that we genuinely don't think are in the best interest of students. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks have.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Who supervises RAs?
It varies a little bit across institution at our campuses, but generally there will be there's often one level of further student employee supervision. Again, the nomenclature changes campus to campus, so I apologize, but often called community directors. And then above that, there will be full-time residence life staff.
And all of the people in I'm sorry if I
No, please follow up.
People in the supervisory positions are employees.
Yeah, yes, eventually. I mean, the residence life staff the full-time residence life staff are employees.
If I might follow up, so on what basis are the resident assistants evaluated, or their performance evaluated?
I don't believe that there is a formal performance. I mean, in the sense of sitting down at the end of the semester and saying, here's your job evaluation, because again, that's not how the role is conceived. But they would be given informal feedback by the community directors based on training from the full-time residence life staff.
And to follow up, also, do all RAs across the university and community college system in New Hampshire have free housing? Is that an always?
For the university system, all of the ones I'm aware of get free housing, yes.
Do you know if that is the case outside of the state university system?
Yes, I know that it is. I can't say that it's universal, but yes, it's certainly very common.
And finally, just one last follow-up. Are there any other any other people serving in similar roles in the university who are either now considered not employees or who may eventually have a similar definition.
So, and this goes to the question about the choice of language, right? This bill would cut and paste the guidance directly out of the federal guidance into state law. It does contain that phrase, generally recognized extracurricular activities. The previous speaker is completely correct. That phrase is not further defined in the bill. If you dig around in the federal guidance document, they have a list of examples of other people, and it does actually align in some ways with what the previous speaker was saying. I apologize, I don't have the whole list in front of me. The two that lodge in my head are if you're the editor of the school newspaper, you put an awful lot of time into that. The university gets some ancillary benefit from it, but that's not employment. And manager of the college radio station, sort of similar thing. I don't know that the university system actually pays stipends to those folks in our institutions, but those are examples that the federal Department of Labor gave that for other institutions that might use nationwide.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Susi.
I just want to go back to a point that was made, and you have responded to a lot of the previous testimony, but the difference between RAs and CAs and why they're coupled together, and actually, how does the university system, what is the acronym CA, how does the university system describe it? And then as I'm reading this legislation, this applies to every college and university in the state, not just the system, so.
I agree, that is how I read it as well. Why RA and CA? I wish that the answer were anything other than education has a real love for acronyms and has a real challenge making them apply consistently. That's my understanding. I just think different institutions use different terms to refer to the same people doing the same thing.
Okay, but what do CAs? I just want to make sure.
What their baseline sort of duties
A
are.
resident advisor.
Yes. So
has a specific duty, and you mentioned that resident advisors, part of your concern is tracking of hours. If somebody stops by their dorm room at midnight and says, hey, I have a problem, can you help? That, to me, is very different than what I think of a CA as, which is typically a more set schedule. And I'm just wondering if you can help me through that.
So I think there are probably, if I were to break it down into buckets, one would be RACAs organize group programming for their halls or floors or whatever the areas they're in charge of. They make themselves available for one-on-one guidance with folks that as requested. And then they do tend to have on-call hours when they are around to handle any incidents that may happen at the dorm, whether that's an individual student need. So rather than setting up an appointment with somebody, they're just there. They're an ear. They can respond to anything that goes on in the building. I would say those are the three most common sets of expectations. Again, each of our institutions does it a little bit differently. So I'm sure if you asked somebody who's doing it at an undergraduate level at Keene or a grad level at UNH, you might get a slightly different answer, but those are the basics, as I understand it.
Okay, and what does CA stand for? How do you?
It stands for Community Advisor.
Community advisor.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we refer to our residence halls as communities, or many of our institutions refer to our residence halls as communities now, living communities.
Okay. So then, if I may just follow up, then I'm sorry, I'm just trying to teach
No,
this
the
out.
nomenclature is,
I did
I
go
understand.
to New Hampshire College, but I was not a resident student. I commuted. The extracurricular activity piece, isn't that really separate and different than being a resident advisor or being a community advisor?
So again, we conceptualize being an RA or CA as more akin to that than it is akin to a job in the bookstore. That's how we have it set up.
And I would agree with that.
But you're right that one of the reasons we brought this forward, as we said, was to try to get this misalignment between the state and the federal guidance out of the way, which is why we brought forward specifically the federal language. If the federal language is causing folks to bump, we can search for another form of words that tries to accomplish the same thing. And that also to address the point that employment security made. Why amend the employment security portion of the statute? And the answer is we're trying to just have uniformity across the board for all of the definitions. But again, if folks are bumping and think it's not necessary, I think that in trying to get to clear alignment and uniformity, we are creating more problems. We're happy to work with folks on alternate ways of phrasing it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Ganem?
So if this were to go down in defeat and went the other way, mine and other children who are RAs would be taxed then, correct? They'd be taxed on $25,000 worth of.
There could be tax consequences. The reason I'm hedging a little bit is if they're categorized as employees, there are a couple of different ways that our institutions could respond. Some of them might be to okay, let's switch these same students over to this hourly model, in which case, yes, there could be tax consequences. But there also could just be a reduction in services. There could be a transition to maybe students don't do this work. Maybe we hire people who just do it, and that's an additional layer of residence life staff who have broader responsibilities. So I can't say for certain, but yes, that is a possibility.
Thank you.
All right, are there any further questions? Thank you very much, appreciate it. The Department of Labor is here. Danielle and Lexi, it appears, want to testify together. Good morning. Yeah, there we go.
Always got to remember to hit the button and make the light red. Good morning, I'm Danielle Albert. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the New Hampshire Department of Labor. I'm here with Lexi Rojas. She is the Director of the Wage and Hour Division. And we are here to note that the department has reviewed the language that is proposed in SB 517. And as noted in previous testimony, has had some communications with the university system relative to this particular language. It's kind of starting with a point that Senator Susi, I think, had raised just a few moments ago relative to the language of extracurricular. It's the department, or was initially the department's understanding, that the proposed language in SB 517 was intended to create an exemption for these resident advisors, these dormitory counselors, dormitory advisors. The language that is proposed, our reading of it, is indicating a much broader category of an employee, of individual, than the original understanding or of that proposed intent. Through some of the testimony, I believe through the sponsor and from the university system, it appears that there's some intent to address these extracurricular activities, chess club, and certain other types of programs that students may be participating in as part of their educational components. But the term as set forth in the language is undefined. It's somewhat broad. We had provided feedback of that nature with some question relative to what did that exactly mean to the university system, and very recently heard back from them understanding that it was intended to encompass those chess clubs and other types of participation in activities that are somehow relating, I think, to a student's particular education. So we would note that we had some of the same question relative to what that term means. I think it can be looked at distinctly from resident advisor. There's a difference or a distinction between resident advisor and somebody who's participating in extracurricular activities, and felt that that was a point that was worth considering or being aware of in looking at this particular proposed language. Again, it's not the department's understanding that the intent behind the bill is to encompass a very large range of students who may otherwise be considered employees in certain scenarios, but really targeted towards trying to capture an exemption relative to these RA situations for the reasons that I believe the university system has explained relatively well. But our reading of it is this is much broader than that stated intent. So we wanted to make certain that that was understood.
Okay. All right, are there any questions? Senator Susi.
If I may. To the extent that it's much broader, and to the extent that RAs might be compensated, resident assistants might be compensated differently than someone who just does club-related activities, how would the department view that? How would you treat that differently if somebody's compensated? I know the example of the bookstore keeps brought up, but I think retail is very clear that that's separate and distinct, and that's employment. Whereas someone who tutors or mentor? I mean, that could be extracurricular. I'm struggling with.
So I think a little bit of background on how this case arose. So this was a situation which was limited to Plymouth State University. And what occurred here was the department found itself in a situation where the university system was in a period of transition. All of the schools were treating their RAs differently, and they were in the process of creating some uniformity when we were involved. And what happened was Plymouth State advertised and treated their resident assistants and CAs, they used the two terms interchangeably, as employees. They were tracking hours, and they were all being paid via a stipend via a federal grant. The grant, if calculated with, and it was our understanding that they were to be limited to about 20 hours per week. And then some students were logging in 40, 50, and we also had up to 70 hours in a week. So there was really a lack of management and oversight if they were going to treat them like employees, to limit them to the 20-hour grant number. So the situation we found ourselves in is we had already a situation in which an employer-employee relationship had been established. So while they were going into a new phase of a relationship with the next class, how do we get them into current compliance? And they didn't want to track hours. So that was the difficulty there. So we did research and we directed them to consider a school tool. So it was 279-22-AA, which is a waiver for an employer-employee relationship if there's an educational learning opportunity component. And we felt that that was its best fit, given the relationship and how the nature of the employment relationship had been explained to us. They didn't want to do that because they had pointed out that some of their students had dual employment in that they were working at the bookstore or with the cafeteria. So our rule did not permit that at the time, but we have since amended our rule to allow for a dual employment situation where the roles are clearly defined as different. So work in the school library and can work as a resident assistant or CA. So, so we did amend. Unfortunately, we couldn't, the joint legislative, that the rulemaking process is not fast. So it really couldn't get done to accommodate this current relationship that they had ongoing at the time at Plymouth State. They also were moving away from the stipend. They didn't want to have to apply for the grant anymore. So at the time, because they were not, they didn't want to go under 279, they were only providing, they weren't giving meals at the time, they were only giving board. And you can't have something that's a job requirement living on campus also be considered enumeration. So that was the difficulty with this current situation. So we're looking at a very specific situation in which they were already treated as an employer and employee relationship when we were brought in, through a complaint that, these students were receiving checks in the amount, basically $1.62 wage per hour. So because of how they were tracking the hours and limiting it to just the stipend amount. So that's the situation we found ourselves there.
That's very helpful to have that background. Do you think, and understanding that this came about in part because of a complaint with Plymouth, do you think that the language has the potential to propose problems for other universities or colleges? Because as I stated earlier, I believe this will apply not just to the university system, but would apply across the board.
Of course.
Are there other issues that could potentially be created here?
Yes, thank you. I mean, from our reading of the language is it would apply to all colleges and universities. So it's not specifying that this language would only apply to public universities versus private universities. So it would be an even application to all universities and colleges. I think with some of the, not speaking from the perspective of the colleges themselves, from the department's perspective, I think there would be some concern relative to enforcement aspects as it relates to determining whether or not the exemption as crafted currently is applicable. And again, some of that comes back to what exactly is that meaning of activities that are generally understood to be extracurricular. Now, the university system has pointed, and they've aptly pointed towards some guidance that's given by the US DOL under the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, from their Field Operations Handbook. And again, the examples that are outlined in that field handbook, if you look at it in its entirety, it's at Chapter 10, are outlining that, typically students who are participating in certain types of, not a specifically enumerated list, but certain types of educational activities, and I think they brought it up here with me. Student publications, glee clubs, bands, choirs, debating teams, radio stations, intramural and interscholastic athletics. When those types of activities are relating to the students' education in some way, it's related to their participation in their educational program, are generally not going to rise to the level of an employment relationship. And I think there's some sense to that. I understand what that means, and I understand what that, how USDOL is outlining that. USDOL also notes that what we are calling RAs, or these dorm counselors, also are not rising to that employer relationship level. As it relates to these extracurricular activities, USDOL is also giving the guidance that even if there's a nominal payment, something very minimal, it's not going to rise to that level. But I think the way that this language is crafted, it's simply saying activities that are generally understood to be extracurricular. So it's not defined in any certain way. It's not really certain who's generally defining what makes an extracurricular activity. And again, these were some of the comments or thoughts that we had gone back to the university system with. I'm kind of inquiring, we're not really certain what that would mean. And from an enforcement perspective, that could raise some concern or points for consideration, because you would want to assure that it's a defined term, it's something that can be applied even-handedly, and again, isn't going to be accidentally encompassing more students who are participating in an extracurricular, they're in an educational program, perhaps they have some form of employment with the university that's not related to their education, so it wouldn't really fall under the 279-21 AA educational learning opportunity programs, such that exemption there would apply, but are inadvertently being swept in. So again, we understand that there's an expressed need, certainly for the RAs. We had proposed some language back for consideration relative to creating a specific carve-out for the RAs, given that there's an expressed desire for that. We did have some pause with the kind of meaning of what the extracurricular point meant. And I'm not sure how universities individually would look at that and how they would understand it.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you both very much for being here.
Thank you very much.
That the extracurriculars wouldn't normally fall under our statutes anyways. There's no employer-employee relationship. Right.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, Dan Schaefer would like to speak. Is it Jan? Right? Jan Schaefer? I called you Dan. It looked like a D. Yes, the top of the J was pretty. Yeah, it's all self-referencing. Yes. Good morning.
Yes, for the record, my name is Jan Schaefer. Jan, I live in Warner, New Hampshire, and I'm testifying for myself. Although I am retired, I spend a great deal of my time continuing to work with workers in New Hampshire. I spent 35 years in the labor movement, working both as an organizer and also I worked for 20 years for the National AFL-CIO. And this testimony has been very interesting because I came in here with sort of, what is this? And I still sort of have that feeling of, what is this? Because it seems to me, and I tend to have a pretty narrow view of it, but it seems to me that RAs are employees. They get hired by the university. Their work's directed by the university. It's not like they're off on their own. They can be fired by the university, and they're supervised and trained by the university. And it's certainly not an extracurricular activity, and I know that's been discussed quite a bit here, and I'm assuming that you will probably delve into that a little bit more, like what is extracurricular. But I do have some questions, like based on some of the prior testimony. So RAs at Plymouth were tracking their time, so it seems like that can be done. It might have been a real pain in the butt, as we say, but it can be done. But what stuck with me was that some RAs were reporting that they were working 70 hours a week. Now, that seems like a major job to me, to work 70 hours a week. And I don't know how that came about. I did participate in extracurricular activities when I was at UNH. Probably not the ones you're thinking of immediately, but I taught batik at the MUB. And I was compensated for it, but I was not an employee. I was not. That was very clear. That was an extracurricular activity, and I was not an employee. But some of the things that have been said is that some of the RAs teach other students these skills that they learn, and that the job itself was described, I believe, by UNH as something that is value added to students' experiences, that they acquire life skills through these jobs. Well, there's a lot of jobs where people acquire life skills and they're employees. I would ask, what happens if somebody gets hurt in one of these jobs? They sometimes deal with pretty extreme circumstances. You hope that they don't, and of course they're trained to do that. But what if they're attacked by another student? What happens to them? What if they're physically hurt? Do they get workers' compensation? And will this prevent them from getting workers' compensation? And in terms of, they get a housing supplement, and I think the gentleman from UNH said that they get free housing and the value can't be counted, but then later he said students get billed for housing. So somebody's counting what housing is worth. So it's possible there is a value to housing, and it is calculated. If you, Senator, have students in the university, you get a bill, and there's the tuition, and then there's housing. It is a separate category, and it can be calculated. I think the other thing, I'm confused by the federal DOL because they say guidance. And so I'm just, and I know how that works. They put out, guidance on the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's not law. So yes, we should look at it, but it's not required that these employees be moved into a non-employment category. Also, RAs don't get credit. They don't get academic credit for this work. And so it really isn't even, it's not educational in the way that one would think of something a student would do, maybe an internship, although more and more the pressure is on to pay for internships. But, sometimes people work as interns and they gain skills, but they're not compensated, they're not employees. But they don't get academic credit. And so even though their jobs may be educational, they really aren't treated that way. And I think, just in closing, it's a job. And the person who fills it really is deserving of employee protections that New Hampshire provides. Thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions? Senator Ganim.
So I have one of my many children is at Penn. And so the reason he got the job at Penn, probably the major part was they looked at, he was an RA in college and they saw what he had to deal with. So that's where he was getting an educational opportunity, which wasn't really on his, transcript, but they looked at when he went to Penn that he could deal with people and how he, the educational opportunity was there. So that component was big to him. So, and then you talked about, so that would be one thing, just your comment on that. Then time tracking. So when I was an RA for a year, I did a ton of homework. I was always volunteering to, when everyone would be out, I'd be studying. So it wasn't really so much that I was putting in always time, because I was it was a passive time. Sometimes Friday nights, the dorm was wild. Dominic Hall, Senator, you probably appreciate. But most of the time, it was just, I was there if someone had a problem. They might have a psychological problem dealing with someone else. There could be bullying, all these things. But it wasn't a 24-hour-a-day thing. Even though you were available all the time, it was a very passive activity that had points when it boiled high. So it would be very hard to track that as opposed to a billable hour where you're doing a 15 minutes for a client. And so I would hate to jeopardize this for students throughout, at St. Anselm or other institutions, because we want to have a tight fit for where you want to put them in a box. And maybe this looser fit that we have right now is a better way to be. So just general comment.
Yeah, I agree with you about your son. I mean, there's probably many reasons that they hired him, and that may be one, right? Just for many jobs, they look at everything you've done, right? So I'm not sure that is reason enough to, because if he were an employee, right, and he went forward with that on his resume, they still would have looked at it as, this was a good thing you did, and you learned things from it. That's good. So there are other workers who, nurses, for example, are on call. Firefighters are on call. And there's a way to deal with that. And it seems like if you're an RA and you're assigned for a night, whether it's a wild night or a quiet night, you're assigned to be at the dorm. Your employer has told you need to be there. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to go, downtown and hang out for a while. You've got to be there. And so there's value in that. There's value in the fact that you have to stay in and you have to be sort of the adult in the situation, right? So I think, I think your points are good, but I just think it's not, there are requirements that people have to fulfill.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for joining us. Debbie Sire from the New Hampshire University or College and University Council. Please join us. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to this committee regarding SB 517 relative to the employment status of university students working in educational programs. I'm Debbie Skiri, and I serve as the president of the New Hampshire College and University Council, and we respectfully request your support for proposal SB 517. The NHCUC, New Hampshire College and University Council, is a nonprofit consortium of both the public and private institutions of higher education in our state. These institutions are recognized and they're highly regarded for their outstanding teaching, research, and community service activities. They serve as major centers of activity. They're vital to our economic development in our community and in our state. As I think the conversation this morning definitely demonstrates, SB 517 seeks to provide much needed clarification on the employment status of college and university students serving as resident assistants and in other educational programs. Our members appreciate and support this effort to have this conversation, to make these changes, to make this important distinction for those students working in educational programs. The NHCUC member institutions actively seek to offer our students multiple opportunities to offset our expenses related to college attendance, and serving as a resident assistant can be one strategy to help make college more affordable in our state. This clarification will ensure that students who might not have the financial means to live on campus will be able to explore this as one option. So our colleges and university will also directly benefit as the passage of SB 517 will allow better alignment between federal and state laws. I think we've talked about that a little bit this morning. As it relates to employment status of students, the federal and state alignment will streamline operations, reduce the administrative costs, while also leading to cost savings for our institution. And most importantly, those can be passed on to our students and their families. Thank you very much. I'm happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Senator Ganem.
Yeah, the previous speaker just brought one thing up, and I like to pursue all.
Sure,
even though it's sort of
please.
a problem from my side. If they were, I never thought about it, if you were assaulted as an RA, and then she brought up workers' comp and things, you wouldn't be able to collect under that. You're not under workers' compensation, correct? How would you be made whole?
I wish I knew the answer to that question.
Okay,
I don't.
thank you.
I apologize.
Any other questions? All right, thank you
so
very
much.
And it appears the final speaker is Claudia Istel. If you could join us, please. I think I got the last name right. All right, thank you. Good morning. Of course.
Thank you. I'm Claudia Estelle. I'm a member of the Economic Justice Mission Group of the United Church of Christ in New Hampshire. And I'm speaking for myself. I've learned a lot listening to other people speak, but there were things about this bill that concern me, and I find it disturbing for several reasons. And first of all, these students are serving as resident hall assistants or dormitory counselors, often called RAs, and they're given responsibilities by the college or university and held accountable for fulfilling them, often as part of their financial aid package. And in return, they do receive compensation, in this case, housing, instead of paying for their room, as most students do. But having responsibilities and specific duties and receiving compensation, monetary or of monetary value, is employment, and I don't see how they can be considered not to be employed. Second of all, resident assistants these days have much more complicated responsibilities. While they may still have to let students into a locked room if the key was misplaced, or ask inconsiderate students to turn down their music or clean up the common area, they also are today often the first person on hand to help students cope with bouts of mental illness, being victims of crime, or overdosing on drugs. They also have to enforce health protocols during COVID and probably in other situations. They may, in order to be somewhat prepared as first responders or protocol enforcers, participate in trainings for which they're not paid. The college would be hard-pressed to serve their students well outside of the classroom without people like resident assistants to help students during the night and over the weekends. And third, if they're not considered employees, then they can't unionize. Student unionizing is happening on many campuses at private and public colleges and universities across the country. And these students unionize to have their needs heard and to get fair treatment from their employers in terms of compensation, non-discrimination, and decent working conditions. Many students who are working on campuses need money to pay for their living expenses, food, and school supplies. As young adults in a new setting with new expectations, often with financial aid packages, they feel vulnerable and unable to advocate for themselves. The demands and pressures of their work jobs impinge on their study time and their participation in enrichment activities like clubs and cultural events. Unionizing and contract negotiations are not easy, but when they are successful, student workers can gain better compensation and better working conditions that improve their lives. College administrations are generally not any better than corporations at willingly recognizing that their student workers and employees have legitimate complaints and are undercompensated. And fourth, carving out one specific group sets a precedent that other groups can be targeted in the future who will be the next in line to be classified as not employees. And finally, if this bill becomes law, how will the students who take on RA positions know that they are not employees? In their limited work experiences before college, they probably were always employees. Who would think that if they have to fulfill certain responsibilities at certain times and receive compensation, whether in this case housing and possibly some monetary wages, that they aren't employees? This bill will treat one small group of workers as different with less rights than other workers in our state, and I urge you to vote this bill inexpedient to legislate. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Senator Ganem.
would I be correct in assuming that a lot of an RA's duty, and that, again, I go back to my own days a long time ago, we're being like a big brother, a big sister, a role model, might have you, for the younger kids, the freshmen, the sophomores coming in, you're an older, more mature thing. So it's not a tangible thing that you're supplying most of the time. I'm not like providing it. When I do a first responder job or help someone, someone's drunk on the floor, I'm doing an actual task. Whereas most of the time I'm fulfilling a role as, again, a role model, a big brother. And that would be very hard to tangibly contemplate. Otherwise, you're going to put me on the clock 24/7, 7 days a week. And then an unintended consequence would be you're going to make college, if we raise the cost for these RAs, you're making college harder for some people to go to. You're making it less affordable, increasing the costs.
I understand what you're saying, and I don't know what the balance would be, but I think, as Jan pointed out, that if you have people who are on call, there has to be some way of compensating them for their time, not necessarily hour for hour, 24/7. The RA position, just as you're a senator, I've been a teacher, we don't lose our title or our when we're not working, but there must be some way of balancing that, and I don't have a specific answer to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one question,
Yes.
and you may not be able to answer this, but this bill is simply defining a situation that already exists. Have we had complaints from RAs and CAs about their situation that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of in New Hampshire. I did highlight an article in my testimony that I sent electronically. And it has been a concern for some people across the country. I have to say that college, I teach as an adjunct in a community college, so I'm not familiar with residential colleges.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, appreciate your time. Thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to testify on Senate Bill 517? All right, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 517. Thank you. Senator, it's yours.
Oh. Thank you.
Okay, there you go.
It's a little more.
I can't.
I'm better now. I took that off.
Good. What's this? Oh, yeah.
What are you eating there? What are you
Donut.
You don't bring it up for the whole class?
For $2 each.
Is it gravy or something? What do you have? Look at?
Donuts.
Oh, donuts? Oh, you couldn't. I guess we're not donut worthy.
No, you're not. I'm looking out for you.
Good to know where I stand. Are they good donuts? This is from like a nice homemade little place. Like, I can't. Ulchler had little Lovin' Donuts or something.
Is that right?
Yeah, she brought them in today. I saw the boxes go by. I thought they should have stopped them.
He seems fine. There's Thomas.
Okay.
There's no news about
Well, I didn't click on the link because I thought it's
Good
correct.
idea. It probably is.
I just deleted it
Mhm.
because I don't trust anything anymore. I'm just like, well.
Deja vu all over again. It's 5% who says. Welcome, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, my fellow committee members. I describe it a bit as Groundhog Day, which we're very close to. As you remember in the movie, Bill Murray keeps waking up and it seems like the same thing happens over and over, which is unfortunate because this is really, I think, important legislation and it speaks to how we value workers here in the state of New Hampshire. So Senate Bill, actually I should have said, I'm Donna Susi, for the record, representing Senate District 18. This bill would once again try to incrementally raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour by September 1st of 2024 and $15 an hour by July 1st of 2025. This year, 22 states as of January 1st are increasing their minimum wages, and many did it on the first day of the year. 22 U.S. states. New Hampshire, however, is not one of them. In fact, in New England, New Hampshire is grossly behind our other states. And I have enjoyed actually presenting a chart to the committee over time because I think it shows just how stark the comparison is. In New England, Rhode Island is now paying $14 an hour. Vermont, $13.67. Maine, $14.15. Massachusetts, $15, and Connecticut, $15.69. New Hampshire's minimum wage ranges from $6.42 to $8.44 less per hour compared to our surrounding states. Think about that. There are states surrounding us that are paying double, more than double, what we here in New Hampshire consider to be a fair minimum wage. And our state and job markets are competing with these other states that are paying a much higher wage. In most cases, we are here in New Hampshire continuing to struggle to find employees. There is a workforce shortage that can't really continue to be sustainable for many of our small businesses because it affects our state and our economy. Since 2017, New Hampshire is the only state that has not made some wage adjustment, like increasing the minimum wage. There are different ways to approach raising the wage. I've done it as a flat number because that is what many of the businesses in my district would prefer. They would prefer to see not a complicated to implement wage, but a wage that is administratively clear, that just goes across the board and applies to all employees. And it still, I think, bears saying that the pandemic really exposed some of the issues facing Granite Staters, and those are low pay in some instances and financial insecurity. $7.25 an hour at this point is truly antiquated, and it's time we fix it as we face this labor shortage and as people in our state have experienced inflation. 11 states have statutory requirements for raising their minimum wages in line with inflation. Arizona is an example where they will increase their wage from $12.80 to $13.85, an 8.2% increase. Other states that raise wages on a regular basis, usually tracking with inflation, are Alaska, Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, Montana, New Jersey, Ohio, South Dakota, Vermont, and Washington. But there's still a problem. There's still a problem with perception, particularly when looking at this chart and what New Hampshire says about its workers, that we can't even come up with a reasonable number to say that's the base that we should be paying our employees. And, I'm often asked the question, well, who's still making the minimum wage? I'm seeing signs everywhere. So despite the fact that businesses are offering $15 an hour, workers still can't be found for some of these positions because I think today workers, particularly post-pandemic, are evaluating what time and quality of life means. And for some folks, some of these jobs if they're paying less than $15 an hour, just aren't desirable. Every January, there are a lot of stories that come out, and there was one recently in the Union Leader about what wages look like. The fact that 22 states increased their minimum wage. Nationally, right now, the average hourly wage, average across the board, is $34.10. The average retail wage is $23.86. Knowing all of that, what does it say about us that we cling to the $7.25 an hour? And we don't even cling to it in our own statute. We let Washington decide. We simply defer to that. We don't take control and ownership of the decisions that impact our businesses and our employees. And I think what we need to do is demonstrate that our employees should be valued more. Certainly, our aging population is going to be in need of a strong workforce to support many of our citizens as they age out of employment, as they age into having greater care needs. And our system is going to depend on a lot of lower wage workers. We know that there's a housing shortage, a 0.5% vacancy rate for rentals and rising rents. And there are people still trying to cope to afford those rents. You know, when I first introduced this legislation in 2013, 12 years ago, the average cost of a two-bedroom apartment, including utilities, was $1,000.76. Today, the number for rent alone, average for a two-bedroom apartment, is $1,764 a month. That alone indicates that our market has changed. Part of that is inflation. But the fact that people who work full time, in some instances are without homes because not only is there a shortage of availability, but because of the cost, they're unable to find a place to live and sustain themselves and their family is just heartbreaking. According to the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute, about 100,000 Granite Staters live in poverty. 1 in 4 households has less than $50,000 in income, and more than 1 in 6 has less than $35,000 in income. You know, as I've said before, raising the minimum wage impacts low-income workers. It disproportionately impacts women and people of color. It, I think, is a moral imperative that we as a legislature finally admit that $7.25 is not representative of our state's value of the dignity of work. And it's particularly troubling when just this past session, we are phasing out the interest and dividends tax, a tax that 20 people pay in excess of $200,000. We weren't looking at increasing it for those that pay a smaller increment, those that earn less interest and dividend. We're completely phasing it out so that the wealthiest in our state no longer have to pay that tax. And yet at the same time, we can't say that people who work 40 plus hours trying to get ahead can't see an increase in their wage. Now, many of them already are certainly making more than $7.25 an hour. As a matter of fact, I was asked on the radio recently by Drew Klein where there are people making $7.25 an hour. And I said, I'm struggling to find them, Drew, and you're making my point that the fact is here in New Hampshire, wages are already a bit more. In some instances, not quite 15. I recognize that. But the fact that we do not, I believe, recognize the dignity of work, the fact that we can't even move the needle. And, you know, I challenge those of you that don't agree with 15, then let's talk about a different number. But no one in good conscience can say $7.25 an hour is representative of what employees in the state of New Hampshire, be they high school age, be they retired, be they anywhere in between, be they people who have children who are trying to afford housing. No one can say that that's really the reality that all of us face. And as I've said before, it says a lot about this state. It says a lot about the message that we send to workers. And it is finally time. I have persisted in this endeavor for many years and will continue because I think the value and dignity of work should be recognized. For all those reasons, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'll conclude my testimony. I'm happy as always to answer questions. But I would once again just call your attention to that chart and ask if you want that to be what New Hampshire is really representative of in this day and age. Thank you.
I'll just have a quick question too.
Mhm.
Thank you for taking my question. So years back, I had checked with the BIA and they had said there were around 5,000 people actually making 725. This was a couple years back. I haven't checked back with them since. And so is this, is there no one out there making 725 in reality?
I have not been able to identify, but I cannot say that for a fact.
Okay. And my follow-up would be, it used to be one of my kids was working at Dunkin' Donuts and they looked at it as a training wage. They started you and if you showed up for a month, they gave you $8.25, $9, and you, by 6 months, you were making your 14 or 15. It was just a training wage on the day when you don't really know how to do anything. You're 14, 15 years old. And that was what the 725 was for. In your answer to that.
I truly appreciate your question, Senator, because it was in fact Dunkin' Donuts franchise owners that I met with, not just in my district, but some out in the western part of the state, who all said, please do not do a training wage or a separate wage. Please, for the sake of our administration and payroll, set a flat rate so that we pay our employees across the board. And when I met with them, they all said universally, be they in the rural parts of our state or in the city of Manchester, they all pay $15 an hour, and they're all continuing to look for employees.
Thank you, Senator.
So, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Susie, and I see value in what you're saying. But I went and I looked at the New Hampshire Occupation, Employment and Wages for New Hampshire in 2023. And I went with the lowest, most basic, like a retail person is $18.23. An office clerk is $23.69. A customer service rep is $21.93. And a janitor, $18.54. Fast food worker, $14.22. So I looked at like the absolute 10 positions with those with that pay. So while New Hampshire is successful right now and people are getting above that, I'm not clear. They're not getting 725. So I'm trying to understand why you feel we should raise it if employers are already paying in excess of that.
Thank you for the question, Senator Ricciardi. There are absolutely the averages that you stated are all well above 725, but there are some workers that are making $10, $11, $12 an hour. And as I've said repeatedly, I believe, and I'm not supposed to have props, but all of you have this chart. This is a statement that New Hampshire makes. Anytime we are part of a national survey looking at states and how work is valued and how, and we pride ourselves on, the New Hampshire advantage, on a successful economy. But anytime somebody looks at our wage, what they see is a shameful number in this day and age. And that's why I believe we should increase the wage to something that is far closer to what we know our businesses are already paying. It's not an onerous burden on our businesses because they are already paying more than $7.25 in the vast majority of cases. And having that safety net for workers when they look I think is truly an imperative, and it just says a lot about us as a state.
Thank you.
Senator, just a quick question, and I don't know the answer to this, but I probably should. Wait staff at restaurants and that sort of thing. Do you know where they're typically compensated at this point?
So they are required to make, and I think you're going to have some testimony from the organization, but the tipped wage is half of the minimum currently. What my legislation tries to address, though, is the circumstances where someone is being paid that, but their tips don't have to, you know. So what I'm looking at doing is ensuring that their tips have to equal the half wage, and the tip have to equal the minimum. So $15 an hour for wait staff. Now, you will hear testimony, and I know because I talk to a lot of restaurant owners. I mean, in many cases, some of the serving staff are making wonderful wages, far in excess, $30, $40, $50 an hour in some cases. You know, on a busy Friday or Saturday night, somebody that really turns over their table, they're doing phenomenally well. But there are some instances where people are working, you know, let's say mother's hours. I mean, I don't really like that expression, but working at a breakfast place and for whatever reason, don't even realize $15 an hour. The employer is only on the hook for compensating them up to $7.25. So if we increase that to 50, that would at least guarantee hourly wages for wait staff not making the money in tips for whatever circumstances may arise. And I think that's really important.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Senator Shanley, you all set?
Thank you so much,
Senator
Mr. Chairman.
Susie. Appreciate it. Henry. There you are. Mr. Hayu, welcome. Good morning. How's Bedford? Bad commute? Good commute?
Good commute, Senator. Thank you. For the record, my name is Henry Bayu, and I'm here on behalf of the New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association. And it always, always, always pains me to have to testify against the good senator from District 18's bill. And not necessarily on the wages where she wants to bring it up to, but our issue always is with addressing the tip wage. Tip employees aren't really minimum wage employees. They're not folks that are at the minimum. I think the senator mentioned when you take their tips into consideration, they're well over what the minimum would be even in this bill. So the issue that we have is with the language around 45% of the applicable minimum wage. So back in 2021, this legislature passed a bill on tip wages that said if the federal government was to raise the tip wage, that the tip wage here in New Hampshire would remain at $3.27. The current law, state law, says that the tip wage is 45% of the applicable minimum wage, which for all intents and purposes right today is $3.27. And so the legislation that was passed in 2021, the idea was to keep it at that. If the federal was increased, or even if the state was increased, the employer would still be on the hook for having to pay up to that increased wage. So in this instance, $15. So that part of the bill isn't really a problem for us. So your bill has actually gotten pretty good over the years. You've done very good. But our remaining issue is with that section of the bill that would keep the reference to the minimum from the employer at 45%. And that's it. So.
Viola? Okay. David Trumbull. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Viola. Go ahead.
I wasn't sure if you're calling me to speak or just reading out the name, so I'm here.
Good to see you.
Good morning, members of the Senate Committee. For the record, my name is Viola Katsime, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm representing Grind State Organizing Project. We are a faith-based grassroots organization that unites labor advocacy groups and individuals who want to work towards a more just world. And we're here to support SB 308 to raise the minimum wage $15 an hour by 2025. We have seen studies year after year, and a recent study by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which was from 2022, tells us that 5,000 workers in the state of New Hampshire earn at or below $7.25 an hour. And 4,000 of those earn $7.25 an hour. And to the previous speaker and the questions I had from the committee, if someone is working in a restaurant and they're working on a non-busy day, they're likely to be making $7.25 an hour. Or if they are helping clean the tables when the restaurant is not open, they're making that amount of money. So there's people out there who are making that amount of money. And that number it's a Bureau of Labor Statistics information that anyone can access and really see how we're doing in the state. We know that our minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 an hour since 2009. But we know the prices of goods and services continue to go up year after year. The rent has gone up, healthcare costs have gone up. And New Hampshire's wage is too low. We've seen the charts of what our neighboring states are paying. There's nowhere in the state of New Hampshire where anyone can live on $7.25 an hour. I just want to challenge anyone here who thinks that you can live on that money. Just try it for a week and see how you're making out. Just to go back to my testimony, I think Senator Susi referenced the medium cost of housing. $1,700 roughly is what we are paying for a two-bedroom apartment in the state of New Hampshire. But to put that number into perspective, I have stories of people who are working, a single mother with 4 kids. Her rent went up $700 at the beginning of the year, just after Christmas, which was a 25% increase in her rent. And she's a property manager. She works full time. She's already making sacrifices. But she was telling me, she was like, how much more sacrifice can I make for myself and for my family? These are people who are working. Another worker who works at a Dollar Tree, they earn they earn $1 or $2 above the minimum wage. Someone was asking, people, yes, maybe making $10, $11, $12 an hour, but they're still struggling to make it. So this individual has to live with multiple people because they cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment by themselves. Like, that's the reality of people that are working in the state of New Hampshire. You see every day when you go to check out at the grocery store. So raising the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour is going to help protect workers that have been left behind. And we see cases of companies like Walmart who increase the minimum wage, and then maybe after a few months, they put the wage lower. So this is a protection for workers, because we've seen that in so many cases. And we do know that we're not trying here, we cannot really rely on employers to regulate the pay scale for workers, but what we can do is protect people here that are really working and have been working for so many years on low wage work, because they are getting benefits when that money could be used and spent on other services or targeting like seniors and people with disabilities or other groups of people. But these are working families that want to sustain themselves. So I just want to urge you to really approve this bill and vote out to pass. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Sure. Yes, go ahead, Susie.
One quick one. I know you interact with a lot of folks who are in circumstances where they are not compensated well, but could you just speak to the issue? My understanding is if somebody's working 40 hours a week for $15 an hour and they work 52 weeks, that's $31,000. My understanding is that number would qualify them for all types of government assistance. Is that not the case?
Absolutely. I myself used to work at our big retail store and I used to make $8. This was like a few years ago before I changed jobs and careers. And at that place itself, I used to see people that are working full time that used to sign up for housing assistance, food stamps, and these were parents, people that had families. Luckily, I was a student, and I didn't have a family, so I could somehow make ends meet. So that's definitely very, very true. And we run a tenant clinic in our office every Wednesday, and we see lots and lots of people that walk in needing help with their rent. And these are people who are working 40 hours a week, even more sometimes. So that's a reality.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Hey, have a great day.
Thank you.
Bruce Berkey. Morning, Mr. Berkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Bruce Berkey, and I'm here representing the National Federation of Independent Businesses and the over 1,700 members here in New Hampshire. And I do have my badge, but it cracked and won't quite fit. But anyway, I just wanted to share a few thoughts relative to this bill. The NFIB is opposed to the bill. We, like Mr. Veyu, we don't like opposing Senator Soucy, but in this particular instance, we are concerned about impacts and consequences and the decisions that small business people make every day. And the studies have shown that the impacts on perhaps job loss, perhaps reduced hours, are going to be part of a business owner's decision-making process. And they are going to do what they need to do to make sure that they can remain profitable while providing the services to their customers on a daily basis. There's a pretty free and healthy marketplace right now for wages in the state of New Hampshire. Certainly Senator Soucy touched on the challenges to fill all positions within the business community, and housing is certainly an issue. But I would suggest that those issues are prevalent throughout New England, if not the Northeast and perhaps the country. I don't think New Hampshire is particularly unique in that regard, but so there are challenges out there. And when it comes to valuing employees, I think that the employers here in New Hampshire do value their employees. They are paying $14, $15, $16, $18 an hour. We have an intern in our office this semester, and we are paying her $18 an hour. And she does great work from UNH Manchester. So it's been a great help. But that relationship between the employer and employee is important. And to that end, raising the minimum wage to $15, it becomes a question of impact on that employee. And I'm going to share with you a concept that I think I've shared with this committee before, and that's wage compression. And when you have increases in the minimum wage, and someone is making $15 an hour, or they're making $18 an hour, like our semester intern. If that minimum wage is all of a sudden deemed to be $15 an hour, and that person is making $15 an hour or $18 an hour when they thought that they were making well above minimum wage, but they were making, what the market yielded, all of a sudden they don't feel as much value if they're making close to the minimum wage. And that's going to, cause people to want more in their wages. And we've seen this in different industries across the state, not just with interns. And it's, again, it goes back to those decisions that business owner is going to have to make, because all of a sudden, if they're going to have to pay that $18 an hour employee $22 an hour, then is that person going to have fewer hours? going forward? Possibly. So I think that there are consequences and impacts to be considered as you review this particular legislation. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my remarks and happy to try and address any questions the committee may have.
I'm just going to ask you a question because I've been here a long time and listened to Senator Susi. Is there a number that would not hurt the business industry, which would not cause wage compression if you went up, say, we'll just pick a number, $10 an hour, and then I believe an earlier speaker had talked about half the tip wage, 15 being too much. If you went up to 10, it would probably cost $1.35 more, or for the tip wage base, the half price, or 90 cents if you went up to $9 approximately. Is there a lower number that both tipped wages and compressed would not be affected by?
Well, Mr. Vayu is my partner in business, and if he's still in the room and my back is to him, I'm a little concerned answering that question. But
sure, be your partner. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what that number is. I haven't seen an economic study to see what, where that crest is in terms of the impact. Is it $7.25? Probably not. Is it $15? We think that's too high.
Sure. So you can see where I'm coming from.
Yes.
Year after year, I do hear my fellow senator, and I watch living wages go up, everything goes up, costs go up. And so I am aware of what she's saying, and I sometimes think we should have some more awareness to it. And I didn't know if you had thought of those numbers, so maybe get back to me on them.
I will endeavor to discuss this with the National NFIB organization does have some economists on staff.
Okay.
And I will address that with them.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you. David Trumbull. Morning, Mr. Trumbull.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. So I stand opposed to, my name is David Trumbull. I'm from the town of Ware. I'm also a vegetable farmer, and so I speak as a small business owner and also just as a concerned citizen. So first of all, I think raising the minimum wage is a matter of economic dignity. If you work 60 hours a week, so let's suppose you have two people as adults, two children, one works 40 hours, they come home, take over the kids, the other one goes off to work 20 hours. At $725, that's $22,600. The federal poverty level for that family of four is $30,000. You're still $8,000 below the poverty level. What is a living wage for New Hampshire? There's lots of websites that will tell you what a living wage is, but MIT has one that will tell you for every state in the United States, they use the same formula. They say it's $79,000. So even at $15 an hour and 60 hours of work, you're only up to $46,800. You still haven't reached a living wage. But the point is that it's a matter of economic dignity. Setting a minimum wage below the level at which is the federal poverty level, even if you work 60 hours a week to support your family, that is a moral shame for the state. Senator Susi gave you all the statistics from the other New England states. If you add up all the New England states and average them out, it's $14.50. We're exactly half of their wage. That's just a ridiculous economic policy. It's set in stone from decades ago, and we've been afraid to move it. So the question comes up, well, who would be impacted by this? How many people are making $7.50 an hour? There are a few thousand people, but I think the impact of raising the minimum wage is not on so much on those people. It would be serious for them, but it's setting the wage floor higher. Because I know at my farm, we start at $17 an hour, and as people work another year, they go up $1 an hour, then they go up another $1 an hour. The wage floor is the function of the minimum wage. So what that means is that if you set it at 15, eventually in 2 years, everybody's wages are going to go up because the employer says, well, I have to somehow distinguish this person that's worked for me for a couple of years. Their wage is going to have to be more than 15. Now, the previous speaker said, well, that's a bad thing because the workers feel valued right now because they're getting paid twice the minimum wage. The New Hampshire worker does not feel valued because the state of New Hampshire has been living in decades ago. It has an artificially low minimum wage. That doesn't make a worker feel valued when they know that every state around us, the minimum wage is $15 an hour. It makes them wonder what's wrong with New Hampshire. But it doesn't make them feel valued because they get paid twice what the state says the minimum wage is. What those workers want is a chance to be able to support themselves and not have to rely upon any help from public assistance. That issue was raised. So I think raising the wage floor is the big benefit of the minimum wage. There's some other advantages. Senator Susi talked about the labor problem. A lot of people leave New Hampshire to go do minimum wage jobs if they live along the border in Maine or Massachusetts and Vermont. We have a labor problem in New Hampshire. If you raise the minimum wage, those workers won't leave the state. They'll stay here. And you won't have so many businesses coming to you saying, we can't find workers. It'll also help you with your housing problem. We're trying to find more housing. Every single time we get another development for 20 or 30 houses, we get excited. But we could solve that problem to some extent by raising the minimum wage. So these people would, instead of leaving the state to go work, they would continue to work in the state, and therefore you wouldn't have to try and import people to come in to the state to take these important jobs. And as we get older, we're going to need more people in those jobs. The last thing is just to talk about some of the studies. The gentleman before me said there's going to be job losses. That was true 40 years ago. That was the prevailing economic opinion. But there are no economic studies that support that anymore. I looked up, did a fair amount of research, and I'll submit my testimony for you. Here's one from the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 2019. They estimate the effect of minimum wages on low-wage jobs using 138 prominent state-level minimum wage changes between 1979 and 2016. So that's 37 years. They looked at every increase in the minimum wage across the country. And they find that the overall number of low-wage jobs remained essentially unchanged over the 5 years following that increase. So it happens all over the country. Everybody else has raised their minimum wage, and even looking 5 years out, no unemployment. So that is a myth that should be retired. Actually, raising minimum wages helps small businesses. Well, you say, how does it help a small business? It reduces turnover. If you don't have to keep retraining people all the time, you save money as an employer. If you pay people a fair wage, they'll stay with you. If the wage floor goes up, they'll stay with you because they know they're going to get another $1 or $2 an hour. Raise the minimum wage, and you actually provide dignity to workers, and you will help your employers because they will now be paying a fair wage to their workers. Another study, this one's from the Fiscal Policy Institute, and these are from a site called businessforfairminimumwage.org. This is from the research from the Fiscal Policy Institute, showed that states that raised their minimum wage above the federal level experienced better employment and small business trends than states that did not. So it helps small businesses. They cite another study here. You can read it. I'll send it into you. It increases worker productivity and decreases turnover costs. You raise the minimum wage. You're now treating workers fairly. The small businesses will benefit. They may kick and scream a little bit at some of them, but I think most employers in this state would say it's about time we do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. No questions. Thank you very much, sir. Claudia Issel. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
So
Thank
soon.
you for hearing my testimony. As I said previously, I'm a member of the Economic Justice Mission Group of the New Hampshire Conference of the United Church of Christ, and also a member of the Moral Economy Table. And the minimum wage has certainly been one of our primary issues. As a person of faith, I believe that every worker deserves respect and a living wage for their labor. Every member of society should feel valued and be able to earn a decent living that allows them to provide basic needs for themselves and their family: food, clothing, housing, communication, transportation, medical care, and education. Numerous studies in various fields highlight the intersectionality of these areas, supporting what our common sense already tells us. The people who are financially secure have better health and because they have food and are housing secure. That allows them to learn better so that they can focus on the subject at hand rather than worrying about their hunger and how to pay their bills. Reliable transportation and good health lead to better attendance, and all these lead to better job performance. More productive workers benefit the economy, and workers who feel valued and don't have to worry about their financial needs can devote more time to enriching the lives of their families and participating in their communities. This is not a Pollyanna view of the world. This is a moral view where every human has the right to earn a decent living, to be respected, to be given dignity for their positive contribution to their family, work, and community because they are human beings. Unfortunately, in New Hampshire, this is shared by only about half of our workers. I'm going to use information from the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute and other sources, and I have that listed in my testimony. While the national and state economies are robust, the median income is not kept up with inflation in 2022, and that probably accounts for the fact that consumers are complaining about the economy while government reports are positive. We've heard about the MIT living wage calculator. I cited the one for a family with 2 working adults and 1 child. That's nearly $83,000. And they're allowing only $1,394 for housing, yet in 2023, as somebody already pointed out, housing in New Hampshire, a median price for a 2-bedroom apartment in New Hampshire costs almost $1,800. It was $1,764. So even with the MIT living wage figures, if you look at their charts, you can see that food, childcare, and housing take up nearly half the family's income. It was also pointed out that in New Hampshire, 1 in 4 households have incomes below $50,000, and 17% of Granite State households have income of less than $35,000. The economic pressure on these households to meet just food and housing is even greater, and explains why so many workers, even if they can find childcare, cannot afford it. So how do these annual incomes relate to hourly wages? I use the idea of somebody working 40 hours a week for 50 weeks because it gives a nice round number of 2,000 hours worked, which I think in some cases is generous because a lot of employers are not, in order to avoid overtime, are making sure that their workers are not working they'll stop them at 32 hours rather than let them work another day where they might risk reaching 40 hours. So the MIT figure of $82,937 for 2 working adults and a child means that each adult would need to earn almost $21 an hour. In a $50,000 household income, if you have 2 workers, they need to earn $12.50. In a $35,000 household with 2 workers, each would have to earn $8.75. And as was pointed out, even at the poverty rate of $15,225 for a single person in New Hampshire, the hourly wage still would have to be over $7.60 an hour, which is more than our minimum wage. And we've already heard about the fact that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2022, there are 5,000 Granite Staters who earn the minimum wage or less. And no, they're not just new employees being trained or young teens seeking job experience and spending money. They're mature adults with dependents and years, even decades of work experience. They're teens who work to buy all of their clothes and school supplies and whose paychecks are critical to the family income to pay for food and rent. The 4,000 Granite Staters who earn less than the minimum wage are most likely tipped workers who are earning $3.27 an hour as established by the New Hampshire legislature last session, and who, despite the laws, do not always earn even the $7.25 minimum wage that their employers are supposed to guarantee them. There are many workers in New Hampshire who earn significantly more than the minimum wage, maybe 10 or 12 or 13.50 an hour. And I know the senator pointed out that the average wages of 17 and 18 and $23 an hour. I'm sure that my friend who works as an LNA would love to be earning more than $15 an hour. She gets about 14. And my daughter who works in a supermarket gets around 13 something. So there are people who, yes, the state's paying more, but they're still not making enough. At $13.50, a worker would be earning about $27,000 a year, which is less than the $36,000 living wage for a single adult, and much less than the $74,000 living wage for an adult supporting a child. Poverty and financial insecurity are very real in our state, and while our state prides itself on its 7% poverty rate, which from a moral perspective, I think is still too much. The picture of poverty in New Hampshire varies. In counties like Kiosk and Sullivan, it's over 11%. And by groups of people, certainly more women and children than men. And the elderly poverty rate, which is currently about 7%, I would suggest is probably rising if you listen to what's happening at food pantries and meal programs. They're serving more and more older adults. Among those who are living in poverty, 1 in 3 are disabled. So working one's way out of poverty isn't always an option. If one is disabled or elderly, or can't find affordable childcare, or doesn't have reliable transportation, or has a part-time job with unpredictable schedule, which makes it impossible for them to take on a second job. Furthermore, 1 in 3 Granite Staters say that usual household expenses were difficult or very difficult to meet in 2023. And 27% of New Hampshire households do not have $2,000 in savings. Supplemental pandemic monies have eased financial burdens, but those are gone now. And wage increases, adjusted for inflation, jumped in 2019. But in 2022, they fell in many areas, including education and health services. And those are 2 areas which are the largest employers in our state and also have huge need for more workers. Raising the minimum wage is crucial to the well-being of Granite Staters. The $15 in 2025 will not be a living wage. It's not a living wage now. But however, it reestablishes a minimum wage in New Hampshire and makes significant steps towards compensating workers, including tip workers, more appropriately. The Economic Policy Institute pointed out that if we raise the minimum wage to $17 an hour, which is more than this bill suggests, it would positively impact 124,000 workers in New Hampshire, approximately 1 in 6 workers. This bill is less, it has less of an increase, but it would still have a significant effect. And I urge you to vote, it ought to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sissel. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Final speaker, I believe, Gail Kinney. She left, so we are done. Anyone else wish to speak on the bill who hasn't had an opportunity on 308? Seeing none, thank you. Do we have? Thank you all. Do we have? Okay. No, yeah, no, there was no.